Hey everyone, Jamie Holroyd here. I hope that you're well. In this little video essay, I'd like to kind of discuss some lessons which I've learned from buying and selling guitars. Like many of you, I basically kind of got into it in the pandemic a little bit. Between 2020 and perhaps 2023, I was buying and selling guitars. And don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-buying guitars now or anti-selling guitars. I'm not telling you how you should spend your money or how many guitars you should have. It's a personal preference, and there's different people that are going to need different guitars and want different guitars, let's face it, for certain reasons. So obviously if you're a professional player, you might need a couple of guitars based on what it is you do professionally. And if you're a hobbyist, then you might also need a few guitars based on the sounds that you basically are interested in. So I'm going to be discussing and sharing with you some of the lessons which I've learned through basically buying and selling guitars. Have they made me more creative? Have they made me a better player? I think you probably know the answer to that one, but let's kind of get on with the video anyway. Just before we begin the video, I'd like to tell you about a free beginner jazz guitar course which I have available for anyone that is new to learning jazz guitar. I've put this jazz guitar course together to break down jazz guitar in a coherent and structured way. There are over 25 4K video lessons and a 40-page downloadable PDF to help you get started. Each module comes with downloadable PDFs, chord diagrams, etudes and studies to help you get started learning the wonderful art of jazz. The first lesson which I've learned is that no one really cares, no one's really interested in what it is that you're playing. It's all about what you do with it and how you make it sound, and that might seem obvious, but it really is true. And to basically kind of give you an example of that, I spent a month or two this year. I didn't mention it on the channel or anything like that, but I basically spent a month or two where I just played one electric guitar and one acoustic guitar. And I think there were times where I was really just playing the one acoustic guitar all the time. I basically have a Taylor GS Mini, which you may have seen on the channel before. And I was using that just as a little bit of a test for all the teaching and all the work that I do. So I did a couple of videos on the channel with it. I did my Zoom classes with it. I did a few kind of general guitar lessons with it. And I was even kind of teaching like, you know, metal solos and kind of advanced guitar solos. And anybody that is a guitar teacher will know that, you know, say if you're trying to play a fast run or something like that, you can actually play a lot of that stuff on acoustic guitar if you're a good enough player. And, you know, if you have trouble getting higher access to frets and things, you can always play them 12 frets down. It's more when you're teaching guitar, what people struggle with is the clarity and rhythmic aspect most of the time anyway. So I was surprised that I was just using this kind of Taylor GS Mini, a small portable acoustic guitar, to teach all these things on. And, you know, if there was ever one particular part on an in-person lesson which I had to really demonstrate where I needed distortion and stuff, then I could just grab the student's guitar, play it, give it back to them. Pretty easy really. And you know, if I'm demonstrating something that the student needs to listen to, having their guitar and playing it makes them less distracted anyway. So none of those students ever cared, you know, if I ever turned up to a jazz guitar Zoom lesson or a class and I was just with a Taylor, a Strat or whatever. Occasionally someone might make a little bit of small talk about a guitar or something like that, because that's what that can be. But no one really cared. No one ever really questioned anything about my authenticity or my abilities based on the guitar which I played. Another lesson which I've learned is that we sometimes just go around in circles with gear. You know, and we always come full circle. And let me give you an example. So as many of you may know from watching the channel, I'm not massively into owning or using tube amps. I don't really have a need for them based off what I do. That's not to say I don't like them and I wouldn't use them and I wouldn't record with them. Some of the best sounds I've ever had have been with tube amps, or at least a 50/50 amp like a Music Man. But in terms of everyday, month in, month out, year to year usage, if I had one, it would get so little use, it wouldn't really be good for a tube amp. So what I've done frequently though is I've kind of bought a tube amp, sold it, bought it again, and I'm trying to get out of this cycle, you know, and it is a cycle, and I'm trying to kind of get out of that kind of gear thing full stop, because, you know, it can be tiring really. I had a Blues Junior once, and don't get me wrong, I enjoyed doing this and I don't regret it. It was fun to use it, fun to play it. Sold it, and then a year or two rolled around and I did the same thing again, and I sold it for the same reason why I sold the other one. There was a hiss that comes from the amp, which is no good if you're doing what I'm doing, and the maintenance of tube amps as well. So ultimately it can be a cycle, and it can, don't get me wrong, there's a certain amount of kind of discovery you've got to do. You know, for example, it might be nice at least to try or own different types of guitar, but the problem usually occurs is when you think, I need you know, a semi-hollow guitar, I need a nylon string guitar, I need this guitar, I need this amp, I need that. And don't get me wrong, it's good to try them, and you should always try these amps, but generally speaking, in a lot of cases, the best guitar for you is probably the one that you already have. Another lesson which I've learned from this is that talking about gear is actually more fun than actually playing it. If you're watching this video now, there's a chance that you could have a guitar in your hands, and that's great if you do. Don't let me stop you practicing, but I'm guessing that quite a lot of you are just kind of chilling out watching this because you like to talk about gear. And of course, talking about gear can also go to, you know, looking online at gear constantly, and what that results in is just less and less actually playing the gear. So I've noticed that a few times I've fallen victim to that, is that, you know, there's been a guitar or a piece of equipment which I've talked about more than what I've played, and I think that's not a good thing. I think really you want to at least be doing a balance rather than just collecting them. Of course, that's my preference though, and like I said at the beginning, these are all your decisions to make. This is some of my own kind of personal reflections. And the last point, which is probably the most important point out of all of this, is that none of this really matters. If you feel inspiration from what you're playing, if you like to play the guitars which you have, you could have 10 guitars, 20 guitars, 4 amps, 5 amps, none of this really matters as long as it's kind of making you happy, really. That's the bottom line with any of this. And that is the thing, you know, especially now. When I'm recording, I'm still surprised at how many people also very complimented and very grateful for all the positive feedback I have on tone videos, where I basically use GarageBand, which is a free DAW that you can get for Mac, and I have loads of people kind of asking about, you know, what I'm doing to record, and it, you know, GarageBand is a free app that comes with Mac that you can record as long as you've got a cheap interface to plug your guitar into. So that's kind of interesting, you know, how that works. But also, whilst that is great for recording, you know, for me personally, what I like I do enjoy using those sounds. You know, even though it might not sound as good recorded, I still like physical amps too, you know. And all this it's all about kind of finding balance and, you know, what inspires you. And I think sometimes to go through that process, you need to almost have too much gear, too little gear, and then you will find what is right for you. And it's like, for example, with amplifiers, you know, as I'm talking about amps, I think I'm right about there with amps now. At the time of recording this video, I actually own 4 amps, but I'll tell you about that. So I've got my Rolling Cube, which many of you have seen, a small little practice amp, which is great to use at home. If you're playing at home, recording or practicing, or even taking it to jams, it's a very light amp, great to record with. Not the absolute best amp ever, but a pretty good sound, which to me is more than sufficient for most of the things that I do. If I ever need overdrive, distortion, or anything like that, it's all there, very easy, very cheap, very reliable. So that's one amp. Another amp would be my Peavey, which you may be able to see behind me, a Peavey Backstage 110, which is a great amp as well. Not a terribly expensive amp, but, you know, Peavey is a fantastic sleeper amp. So all of those Nashville guys like Brett Mason, Brad Paisley and things like that, players like that, Red Volcat as well, all kind of like Peaveys. And I think even Ted Green, you know, just to mention a jazz guitar player there as well, had a few Peaveys as well, and they're phenomenal amps. I think really, really great sounding amps. And the reason why I have that is because the Cube is a small amp, and whenever you hear an amp that's got a bigger speaker and a bigger sound, the small amp sounds small. And of course, on the rare occasion where I am playing out live, or I need more volume or something like that, then I've always got that there as well. And I don't have much money tied into these amps. You know, it's not like I've got thousands of pounds in any of these amps, so it's not a problem really, in that respect. And then the other amp which I've got is a Polytone Mega Brute, which I don't play that often, but when I need it, it's a really great sound, which is transportable, and a Polytone sound, which is like a, if anybody's ever played a Polytone or a Henriksen, they have great jazz guitar sounds as well. So if I probably had to get rid of one, that might be it, but equally, it's a great amp, and at the time of recording this, I don't want to sell it, but who knows what might happen with that. And then the last amp which I've got is literally kind of a Black Star amp, which is effectively used as a Bluetooth speaker. So I don't really play through that or use it regularly. I basically just kind of bought that amp because it's got a Bluetooth feature, which was very useful to play backing tracks for students and things like that. So I probably should sell that, but it's a Bluetooth speaker always seems useful. And you always feel like you're going to need one if you get rid of it, so that's why I've got that. If you have a guitar that you're very excited about to play, it doesn't really matter, you know, how many of them you've got or how much value it is. If it keeps you inspired and it keeps you playing, then that is the bottom line, really. So anyway, those are my thoughts, those are my lessons that I've learned from buying and selling guitars, but of course I'd love to know what you guys think about this too, so share your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks for watching.